Hi guys, let's keep reading. Don't go to the principal's office. Where we left off, all the friends were outside Mr. Amstead's house, and they just saw Mr. Amstead and his wife. There was a woman lying on the dining room table, and Mr. Amstead was sawing her in half. "We can't just stand here and watch this," I said. "Someone needs to call the police." We all started running back towards the porch steps. That wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I had thought someone would stay at the scene of the crime, but I wasn't going to stop and discuss it now. "Oh, this is just terrible," Rebecca said. "I could be in there. I tried to be friendly to him today. I thought, we aren't giving this man a chance. After all, what has he really done?" "He took out part of Sammy Shell's brain," I said as we ran down the porch steps. "Don't forget Ronnie and Franco's brains either," Ted said. Now we were on the sidewalk and running towards the middle of town, towards City Hall, where Chief of Police Gooseby had his office. We were running so hard now, it was impossible to talk, so none of us said anything until we reached the town square. "We're in luck," Ted shouted. "His car's there." His car usually was there, I knew. There's not a whole lot of crime in Westville. In fact, I can't remember anything at all happening until Mr. Amstead came to town. We burst into Chief Gooseby's office. He jumped up startled. He had been watching a detective show on TV. "What's going on here?" he demanded. We all tried to talk at once. Finally, he shouted, "Quiet!" Then he looked at me and said, "You tell me." Well, we went to Mr. Amstead's house to tell him that we know all about the lobotomies he performed on Sammy, Ronnie, and Franco, and About the what? He performed on who? The chief said. Mr. Amstead, the new principal at Croswell, had Sammy Shell, Ronnie Baylor, and Franco Fryer come into his office, and he operated on their brains, Ted said. "He performed lobotomies on them," Rebecca added. "My father's a surgeon, and he talks to me about things like that all the time." Chief Gooseby looked at Ted, and then at Rebecca, and then back at me. "Do you want me to start all over?" I asked. Chief Gooseby nodded. "Okay, well, we went to Mr. Amstead's house, the new principal, to tell him we knew about how he had operated on Sammy, Ronnie, and Franco's brains, and that's when we saw him sawing his wife in two on the dining room table." Chief Gooseby looked at me for several seconds without saying anything. Then he said, "This better not be a joke." "It's not, Chief, honest," I insisted. "Mr. Amstead really did operate on Sammy Shell's brain on the first day of school, and today he did the same thing to Ronnie and Franco's brain. They're just not the same." "What do you mean, not the same?" "They're, nice," Ted said. Chief Gooseby blinked. "Well, that would certainly be an improvement. People around here are getting a bit tired of all the pranks those boys have been playing." He turned back to me. "Now let me get this straight. You saw Mr. Amstead take out their brains, is that right?" "Well, he didn't actually take out their brains, Chief Gooseby," Rebecca said. "He simply cut the nerve fibers leading to the frontal lobes." Chief Gooseby looked at her. "You actually saw him do this?" "No, but we did see him sawing his wife in two," I said. "We just came from his house." "He's probably finished by now," Bobby said. "He probably has 2 wives now." Chief Gooseby sighed and shook his head. "Well, come on then, let's check it out." He turned towards the TV program he'd been watching. It looked like he was really getting interested now. He sighed. "You do know, don't you, that if this turns out to be a joke, I'm going to have to arrest all 4 of you then?" "What'd we do?" Ted asked. "This is called falsely reporting a crime. You can't waste a law officer's time this way. He has other crimes to fight. Other television programs to watch, I thought. It's not a false report, Chief. I told you, we saw it with our own eyes." Chief Gooseby turned off the TV set. Then the 5 of us went outside to his patrol car. I got into the front seat with Chief Gooseby. Ted, Rebecca, and Bobby rode in the back seat in the cage where prisoners are supposed to ride, but I'd never seen anyone in there as long as I could remember. It took just a couple minutes to get back to Mr. Amstead's house. Chief Gooseby parked in front. "You kids stay here. I'll go talk to him." We sat and watched as Chief Gooseby headed up the front walk to the house, climbing the steps, and knocked on the front door. It seemed to take Mr. Amstead forever to answer, but he finally did. "He was probably hiding her body," I whispered to everyone. "Yeah," they agreed. Chief Gooseby spent several minutes talking to Mr. Amstead. Then Mr. Amstead closed the door, and Chief Gooseby came back down the porch steps slowly. down the walk slowly, and got back into his patrol car slowly. Well, I said expectantly, Mr. Amstead said his wife isn't here. She's gone on a trip. He's staying in the house all by himself. But we just saw her. We're not making this up, I insisted. There was this woman in the dining room table, and Mr. Amstead was sawing her in half, and there was blood everywhere. Chief Gooseby didn't say anything. Don't you believe us? Rebecca asked. Chief Gooseby stroked his chin. I'm not sure. For some reason, even that made me feel better. At least he wasn't still threatening to arrest us for playing practical jokes. Chief Gooseby started the car. Well, there's nothing we can do about it tonight. Why? I demanded. The body has to be somewhere in the house right now. Yeah, Bobby agreed. If we wait too long, he'll probably bury her, and we'll never be able to find her then. Chief Gooseby continued down the drive. Well, I'd need a warrant to search his house, and I'd have to go get that from Judge Stockton. And if I do that, then everybody in town will know that something's up. And if the man's innocent, well, he could sue me, you know. After all, a principal is a pretty respected man, and I took a deep breath. Crime is complicated, isn't it, Chief? You said it. But doesn't he look like a monster to you? Ted said. I could see Chief Gooseby nodding his head. He does look like one of those monsters you see on The Late Show, all right. In fact, I was kind of nervous just talking to him up there on that front porch. I know what you mean, Bobby said. We feel that way every day at school. We all nodded. Chief Gooseby took us back to the police station and let us out without saying anything else. We watched him go back inside to finish watching his TV program. The four of us remained outside and talked for a few minutes. It was already almost 8 o'clock, but none of us wanted to go home yet. I know what I saw, I insisted. Mr. Amstead was sawing his wife in half. We can't just stand around and wait until he's had time to bury the body. Yeah, Bobby shouted. We have to get the evidence against him now. Yeah, Rebecca agreed. I thought a lobotomy was bad, Ted said, but getting sawed in half is really serious. The only thing that lobotomy did was turn those 3 creeps into nice guys, Rebecca said. I don't think getting sawed in half would do that. I say we go back to Mr. Amstead's house and demand to see what's left of his wife's body, I said. Everyone looked at me. Are you crazy? Rebecca said. No, I saw something like that on a television once. These people did it, and the man confessed right then and there. Looked really easy, too. They all seemed to think about it for a minute. Then Ted said, well, it might work. We don't have anything else to lose. We started walking. Just as we got to the front of Mr. Amstead's house, Ted said, there's somebody walking towards his garage. Like most of the older houses in Westville, Mr. Amstead's garage was detached from it. I wonder who it is. We all 4 hurriedly got behind the big maple tree in his front yard. I think it's Mr. Amstead, I whispered. But what's he doing outside? What do you think? Rebecca asked. He has a shovel in his hand, Bobby said. We watched as Mr. Amstead carried the shovel into his garage. Oh no, I said. That means he's already buried her. Maybe not, Ted said. Maybe that's what he's planning to do now. Let's get closer. I knew if we stayed close to the shrubs that bordered the edge of Mr. Amstead's yard, we could get close enough to the garage door and not be seen. And maybe we could find out what he was up to. We started running. I could feel the mud in his front yard squishing under my shoes. I had on my best sneakers, and I hated to see what they were going to look like now. The doors to the garage were the old-fashioned wooden kind that swung out on its hinges. We hid behind a lilac bush at the corner of the garage, trying to listen to what Mr. Amstead was doing. But we couldn't hear anything. In a minute, he came out, closed the garage doors, and headed towards his house. I knew it! He already buried her, I said. He was putting back the shovel he used to dig her grave. But where did he put her body? Bobby asked. Where else? Somewhere out there, I said. I nodded to the dark front yard. She has to be here. You know something? That must be the reason he tore up his yard in the first place. He had this planned out to the last detail. Maybe he just wanted a pretty lawn, Rebecca said. I snorted. Yeah, right. This front yard probably has more bodies under it than the Westville Cemetery. Ugh, Bobby said. Let's leave it there. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.